And welcome to another Saturday session. It's episode number 8, and we have Eric, Wolfgang, and myself, Mark, on the line here to see where tonight takes us. Welcome, gents. Uh,
Good morning, good evening. And that was one heck of a fancy intro. I like it.
it only took me way more hours than anything that I'm actually competent at to figure it out, but it's fun. Let's kick off. Highlights of the week in reflection.
I have to reflect what happened on my week. So, I gave one of the highlights of my week was that I gave a workshop for 3.5 hours on collaboration mapping. So this is something that I really love to do. Like, it's not fancy. It's not something really new. It's just you map the collaboration of the people. But there is an awful lot of things that I did, which I found out when I did the workshop, which the people didn't really do up to now. So it's probably more a science than I thought of before, and I still have a 100 slides to write on that topic, I think.
I love the way you just throw around 100 slides. That's like 2 weeks in hell. What about you, Eric? Highlights of the week?
Let's see. Survived the wind. That was probably the kickoff. We're in active hurricane mode, as you all were presenting last week. Since then, life's back to normal. Really impressed with disaster response and recovery here. Just appreciating how different cultures handle things and quite effectively so. Um, Professionally, uh, really just a good week of creation and learning for me. It took me a couple days to get back in my flow, but when I found it, um, had the beginnings of content outlines, like a full paragraph abstract for each of the 50 lessons in the program, and it's really flowing along. So it feels almost like throwing around a term like 100 slides, like the volume is actually up there. And I think the next pass this week's going to be more about going deep on one and getting to a near, I call it camera ready, but more like camera prototype version of a micro lesson to see if I like the feel and the new branding I put together.
Nice. Inflow. So I had a mixed week. Like, it was a good week, but there were some intense workshops with clients. There were a couple of good collaboration sessions on the client front. I really enjoyed our iteration on the book club on Friday, and then I really enjoyed destroying and rebuilding my office, uh, and switching it up rather significantly. So this is it's nice to be standing in the new step and trying out streaming standing up instead of streaming sitting down. So tonight, 3 of us, we know we have the LPM Bootcamp run through kind of booked in for the week. But I actually thought I'd get distracted for a second to chat about sort of evolution of the stream and the way we're starting to think about different topics, different audiences. We've got the kind of Saturday, not quite still just a men's coffee club. Uh, we've got the book club, episode 3, starting to figure out the groove. We've got the ad hoc thought testing sessions. We've started the Deconstructing PI Planning series. And I was just on a call a bit earlier about another potential show. But I thought I'd just kind of kick us off before I share my fresh news on that front to go, what's happening for you guys as we play with different formats, different audiences? What are some of the things that are hitting you?
Okay, I'll jump in. Biggest thing for me is an appreciation of the diversity, where the first few are just kind of like the same people having the same, not the same conversations. We have infinite conversations we can have, but bringing in diverse voices, popping in the community and just chatting for most of an hour yesterday uh, with wow, there's enough people I even forget who it was, Stefan and somebody. Oh, Michael. And just having a great diversity of conversations and remembering the power of a small group of motivated people operating at the tops of their games that are coming together and having these conversations. And I think back walking in the woods in May in Asheville, and Mark and I talking, yeah, we need a little bit more of that in our lives, and we miss that. And we're talking about the loneliness of leadership in a community or in a distributed group of consultants around the world practicing similar stuff. And it's working. I think that's the step back reflection for me is it's kind of working.
Yeah, I know. When I wake up, I check Discord before my email. Yeah.
I mean, I've been in that mode for 2 years, sorry, but
Well, there you go. I spent so long with Discord being gaming and carefully not opening it unless I was taking a gaming break. Been a new habit for
fair.
me.
For a long time. To be fair, Slack was that for a long time rather than not Discord, but same
Yeah.
idea.
Yeah. What about you, Wolfgang?
For me, it feels like a big relief because for many years I was just more or less alone with the thoughts that I had, and I was creating stuff, and of course I was working with the clients, and yes, there was the occasional chat that I had with a colleague, but as I said in one of the last streams, now it feels for me like a quarry where you have large rocks and you can break out stones and then you can do something with it, build something. So actually, I have now created a Jira backlog just for the topics that I'm noting down while we are chatting, and then I'm like I'm noting that down by hand, and then I'm creating backlog entries in the Jira backlog, and I'm ranking them, which one is the most important, and which one should I draw slides on. Not that I'm showing all the slides in a training or anything. It's more like to flesh out my storyline about certain topics. And the backlog, of course, fills much faster than I can draw slides or think about it and create new storylines from it. So in previous years, it was more I was trying to come up with ideas on my own. Now it feels more like it all falls together because there are so many important aspects that I actually missed or that I really never thought about. And the whole material or the whole thing that I'm doing becomes more like, how should I say, complete, I would say. Yeah, for me, as I said, it's a big relief. It's just a different way of doing the stuff that I love to do.
Nice. My son walked out earlier in the week, and I was editing videos. He's like, "Dad, are you spending more time on shaping agility or billing clients at the moment?" I said, "To be honest, probably shaping agility." Uh, but it's giving me so much energy in terms of sparking other brainwaves. And I think one of the things that I'm really enjoying about it is the whole iterative learning approach. And whether that's the iterative learning of feeling like I'm writing object-oriented code again when I play with OBS configurations, or learn technical things, or the iterative learning as we figure out the way we tackle streams, kind of finding a groove and going, this is the thing this is meant to achieve. How does that work? And, the great fresh example for me is the book club, right? First week, great discussion. Better discussion than I've ever had in any book club. Second week just felt like hard work. And variety of reasons, but it felt more like work than fun at the end of it. We retroed, tweaked, took a very different path through the third episode, and it was back to, oh, this is great fun. Really interesting provocations, triggering of connections. And it's the thing that's sitting out to me as we start to go, what else are we going to do with this collection of people? Is what happens as we run experiments and we try things. And, we ran our first PR planning episode, and it's an interesting one. We skirted on the danger edge in terms of holding to our values as things got passionate a couple of times, which sparked a really good conversation today as we started to process that. But it also has been, and this is probably the thing I'll share a little bit about, was some homework that Stefan, Ali, and Nico and I took away from the SPCT Day in Prague. And, we know there's a hot topic every time there's an SPCT Day, which is how do we help the SPCs grow after they finish the SPC course? It's just the routine guaranteed topic. And we had a pretty good discussion about it in Prague. There were some provocative thoughts that actually felt reasonably generative. We had a good discussion in our little crew. And Joe Valone got to the end of the readouts and went, okay, that's good. What are you going to do with it? And we committed to taking a follow-up action on it to try and put something together out of the thoughts we'd had. And for us, it was putting together some guidance on where to go to grow as an SPC after you'd passed your certification. And we didn't set out to write War and Peace. We went, okay, what does that look like? We got back together and we started to think about it. Well, we thought about it a little bit and we went, maybe it looks like we take a capability-based view and we look at it capability by capability, and we start to think about some guidance to go, if this is a capability you're trying to grow in, these would be some of the things you'd think in terms of advancing your skill set there. And we suffered the vagaries of time zones, right? It was very stop, start, stop, start. And so we experimented again to go, what do we do next? Maybe what we'll do is we'll divide and conquer. So we picked a competency each to start with and said, let's try writing an article which is our take on that competency, and then we'll get together and joint review them and see that we can make forward progress there. So we did that. And then 4 people, 4 entirely different writing styles, 4 entirely different interpretations of what we were setting out to do. And you looked at it and went, there's no way you can ever string this back into some coherent thing. Because I think in everybody's heads at the end of the Prague thing was there'd be a guidance article coming out of it. And the first round was like, there is never going to be a coherent guidance article here at the pace of which we spend an hour every 2 weeks trying to converge our thinking. So we iterated again, right? And it's a bit of a stop-start process here. Next iteration, it's like, okay, what about if instead of trying to write a guidance article, we write a series of blog posts for the Safe blog? And they can be linked in a common theme. And what we'll do is we'll each take a competency, we'll write an article, and then we'll have visiting voices in each of those articles. So, if Ali wrote one on enterprise solution delivery, then each of us would write a paragraph to go, this is what was most important to me in terms of my growth in enterprise solution delivery. So you had one voice in an article and outtakes from other voices. So spin the wheel, next experiment, next iteration. Another not quite so good. So this time around, fresh learnings. First learnings was we were all confused about what the Safe blog was, because we talked to Rebecca and Rebecca went, the Safe blogs where the framework team are the only people who author in it. Marketing have a blog, But then you look at the marketing blog and you go, not so sure how that is set up for guest authors or how they go with where we're at. So then we looked at our attempts with that. And again, we'd revised the brief. We'd said, let's have a bit of a common structure to our independent blogs. We all wrote our base first blog. And again, you just looked and you went, we all interpreted the brief completely differently. And so we've got this Miro board at this stage, which is like this journey of abandoned experiments. And you can see connected threads and you can see the comments that we've dropped as we've post-processed and gone, what's the next one? Because we all feel really strongly about it. But it's like, how do you find something that works across a group that diverse? And then around about when we got the feedback about our confusion about the blog, I started to go, I wonder if that is actually better done as a stream series. And we use the stream series as our synchronization method to converge our thought. And at the end of it, we figure out what that turns up like in a written form. But we get a lot of the value in the deep conversations as we tussle it out in a streaming series. And people can either read the very short article at the end or they can watch an entire streaming series. It's like, okay, I think this is the way. Eric.
I'm just, what was the timeline of all of this? About 5 months or so?
Yeah, about 5 months.
Okay, because for some reason I'm having flashbacks to the evolution from branch by feature to trunk based to mobbing as you're having this conversation.
And that's a really good parallel, right? Because not only is it we're only talking once every 2 weeks, but on any given night that we're meant to talk, somebody is in another country unable to attend something else. And the conversation, like they miss a bit of the movement in the conversation, and then we spend the next week we meet catching up the person who missed. It's the ongoing pain. But
We know.
the merge hell is the really apt metaphor for it, and boy, it was merge hell. So last time we got together, I bounced the idea, right? And again, typically we only had 3 out of the 4 of us. And I bounced the idea around. It was just after we'd gone live with Shaping Agility. And I said, hey, I've got this thought. Let's stream. And let's actually converge our thought as we stream. And Nico and Stefan were both like, yeah, let's do it. And so tonight was the night when we got together to go, okay, let's actually do some planning. And we all jumped in. And I discovered, by the way, that Ali is a competent streamer who probably knows more technically than any of us have figured out so far. He showed me his setup and I went, ooh. And by the way, Eric, he has a teleprompter. It's not the Elgato one, but he was raving about it. And I think he just cost me. And so it was like, oh, there's the next stream. And it's, I think what was nice was thinking very intentionally about a different audience. To go, it's not the people who geek out on us just letting our brains run wild, but actually going, there are people who need help. They're people who want to grow. They've wanted it enough to become an SPC, and they're going to be thirsty. But they're sort of the opportunity to meet them where they're at and say, here's some stuff that helped us, or we think might help you. But it was also the learning from these latest experiments on the streaming to go, let's actually just be intentional before we start turning up and hitting the stream button. If we think back to when we started our Saturday sessions, it was like, well, we're not really sure what's going to happen. We're going to talk and we're going to go live on stream and we're going to figure it out. And one of the things that I bounced with the boys was, do we hold it to just the four of us who are there in that room in Prague? Or do we go, actually, if we're going to run this, do we just open it up to the Shape Agility community? Bit more diversity, bit more cover for who turns up and who doesn't. And I actually thought I'd just run you through some of the thinking that we did in the beginning with it. And I should have shown you the Miro, but I have it on screen. Actually, the easiest way is just I'll dump it across onto the stream Miro. Give me half a second.
While you do that, just a couple reactions to what you were sharing there. One is the continuing the parallel. Once you get into that streaming, that flowing mobbing state, new features, new ideas come out
Yeah.
smoothly and naturally. And like you said, that and actually one of the conversations last night was, I won't name which person, but one of the individuals was like, "Yeah, I'm not getting as much value out of the fifth discipline. I'm not sure if I want to stay in the book club or if I would join that book club." And it's like, cool. That doesn't have to be your jam. And we actually had the interesting conversation. Like, he's like, "Would you do a book club on the trusted advisor with the trust equation and all that?" And it's like, no, I'm done with that book. I read it. It doesn't have the richness and the depth that I want to come back to. And that's okay.
Yeah.
And with a right size community, we have just enough people to get 2 or 3 interested people around a topic. That's your seed, that's your core. That's the planting of the seed for a new value stream.
Yeah.
And you start delivering along that flow, and you have fun with it, and it lives its natural life, and the product it develops might cross some random tiny little chasm and have ongoing energy, or it might just have a little hype cycle and disappear in one stream.
Yeah.
And both of those are okay. And in the list of additional things that come up, the idea came up, what if for that similar audience, that SBC level audience, what if we just every stream picked a framework page and went deep on it, having an anchored conversation around the intent, how it goes wrong, how it goes right, what practices it's most powerful with, and so on, and just kind of iterate through the framework, giving ourselves a chance to refresh on things we don't look at. Like I read each article on average probably 1.2 times per framework version. Like I'll read it and then I'll go back and reference it once in a while and go, oh, I missed that the first time. So it kind of meets that like good for our audience, good for ourselves growth edge.
Yeah.
So just another one to toss in the mix.
It's probably actually pretty parallel to what we came up with here. So
Parallel evolution, I love it.
now that I've dropped it in the stream Miro, I'll flash it on screen and just walk through it.
Yeah, my first, just for amusement, my first blog way back in the early aughts was titled Rediscovering the Obvious because of that whole parallel evolution thing.
Yeah. All right. So I did pre-thought because I went, what have I learned from every stream we've done so far? And what would that do to kick this one off? So I started by thinking about structure. We knew that we had an anchor in the capability model. And then there was an easy follow-on anchor to go, there's 3 dimensions in every capability. So if you do 1 episode per dimension, you get a nice frame in terms of the focus area for the episode. And, a coherent process in terms of how you follow it. Next thing was, let's not put it all on one person's shoulders to load it, prep it, and moderate the conversation. And again, kind of springboarding off the fact that we had been running with the kind of different people taking on the key writing for different competencies. It's like, well, why don't we just take ownership of dimensions, and heading into each week, we've got a known person who's preparing the Miro, laying down the framework that's going to guide our conversation. And an opportunity for others, much like we've started doing in the book club, to drop thoughts in so that when we get to a conversation, we've actually got an anchor to bounce off a prearranged idea, and we're sharing the load of the moderation. To avoid boredom, running it as a prioritized backlog helps to be able to reshuffle around when people are available to moderate, to stop us from feeling like we're just marching in too structured a way. And also knowing that we've got a few other topics we thought came up that are important, particularly soft skills. We all felt really passionate about soft skills. It's something that didn't really show up front and center in any of the dimensions at the moment from a coaching learning perspective. And we hunted. I'll tell you, we hunted. You could find kind
That's
of allusions
interesting.
to it, but you couldn't see a real focus on soft skills at the level of the dimension. You see allusions when you dig deep enough into roles like a Scrum Master, or some allusions to it in the leadership areas. So primary output, obviously, long series of episodes on Twitch and YouTube about growing as an SPC. Eventually, figure out what we're going to do with it in written form. Is it a guidance article, a series, a co-written book? Goodness knows. So, obviously the audience, the SPC who wants to grow, and is figuring out where to go next once they've got their exam passed. And then we had a bit of a chat about conventions. So stealing from what we've been doing, the show will go on. If you can't make it, you can't make it. To paraphrase, because I'm good at mangling quotes, I'm going to paraphrase from the open space. Whoever shows up are the right people for any given topic on a given episode. Opening up to anybody from the community who has energy. Closing each episode by locking in the driver and the topic for the next episode. So there's a bit of a kind of link cycle happening there. Conventions, if you miss a session, you watch the recording so you know what's been talked about when you turn up for the next week that you can make. And then we had a bit of a discussion, and we didn't ground it out yet, but that notion of, are you talking about topics by the book or breaking the book in terms of an SPC who wants to grow? And the conversation, well, obviously it's pretty topical for us at the moment after our PR planning episode, but the conversation was, if we've got a fresh SPC, early stages of growth, there'll be moments, we all have moments where we do something slightly different. But in the words of Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility. So being really mindful to go that the audience is someone who might not yet be ready to break the rules. So if you're going to venture off piste in a recommendation, to really contextualize it and position the things that would have to go into that thought. So that was the thought process on structure and conventions. And like many things, I think it reflects all of the things I wish we'd talked about earlier when we figured them out along the way on the streaming journey. Although in many cases, we probably didn't know we needed to think about it until we discovered we needed to think about it. Back to parallels to product development. Pausing for thought. I know I'm monologuing at the moment.
Go ahead, Wolfgang. I've been talking first a lot.
You can go first, Eric. So,
My brain goes to generalization quickly. I mean, it all sounds great in this context, and I think 80% of it I could lift and shift and drop directly on top of the PI planning deconstruction conversation.
Yeah.
And it would work just fine. We got a backlog, we got a list of things. It's intentional around which set of goals and who we're pursuing and why. And then I could do the same thing with a framework, slow coverage of the 180 whatever articles. That's a slightly longer series, perhaps, but
Yes.
perhaps we do more than one per stream. but I love the idea of coming at this from different angles into the same body of knowledge for different audiences. And like taking an event-centric view versus taking a article-centric view versus taking a competency-centric view. Um, it's a wonderful way collectively to put consistent tone and approach around a number of different engagement styles that frankly just are going to help people. And for all of our personal missions, I go back to our personal values that we assembled into the community values. It has a lot of potential to be powerful there.
So, for me, like, I mean, the whole thing is like a big playing ground. So when you first came up with the idea, Mark, that we could do something like that, like streaming on Twitch, it, this was for me. It was like, okay, I don't know whether this will work out, but why not? Let's try and see what comes from it. So I never had anything in mind like what it is now and what it is growing to be, probably. So, to be honest, like I'm more surfing with waves that are coming in. So you're throwing in new things, and I look at the things and I think, okay, this might make sense. Let's try it out. So I love this structured approach. Also, the way how you build up the whole community, how you give the whole community like certain guardrails or like a certain meaning with different topics that we are talking about. And so when I look at the list that you just showed on the mirror board, it's like, okay, another thing, let's try it out. So I, maybe I'm too naive for that, but at the moment, I'm, I don't really have any thoughts on my own because it like, when I would have started with my own thoughts, probably we would never have been where we are right now. And so this is so new to me, and the whole idea and how we are doing that, and also like trying to get acquainted, trying to feel in, to be a part of the whole rhythm that we have every week, and now we have multiple streams every week, and now there are different people on the streams and different formats and things. Uh, Probably it will take, I think, a couple of weeks or months until I've settled enough so that I can make meaningful proposals to how we should develop that, or what else could make sense. But for now, it's really just it feels a little bit like 5-year-old Wolfgang going to the playground and having fun with with other kids.
I can connect to that quite a bit.
And this is not over exaggerated. It's really, there are really feelings from my early childhood coming up when we are doing that. And like, I have never had any thoughts about what to play in the playground. It was like, just go there, have fun. And so I really love the way how you structure that. And I really admire how the community grew through what you did. But right now, I cannot make any meaningful proposals to how we should continue with that. I'm just living the moment, I would say.
It's nice to have that feeling of playfulness. Like, I was chatting to my wife the other day, and she went, "Mark, you've been passionate ever since you started into the agile coaching thing, but the level of intensity of some of what you're doing takes me back to when I used to get jealous of your computer and the way you spoke to her when you were still a programmer."
Wow.
Because I used to
But
like talking to my code.
I intensity is a really useful word there. Like I think about a couple nights ago, I came up to the computer. It was, I don't know, 7:30, 8:30, and I was like, okay, I got a couple hours till bed. Let me probably just mess around, play a game. And I ended up like spending 2.5 hours designing layouts, and I just kind of fell into it. And it's been, frankly, a while since my profession was also a hobby.
Yeah.
And like I remember that from being a developer. As a developer and architect, like as an architect, coding was my hobby, and I enjoyed it. And that fell away as I became a coach and so on. And it's hard to have a hobby of organizational science and design. Like you can read. There's a lot of studying, but it doesn't really work as something you go out to the garage and tinker with. That doesn't work well for the small businesses down the street you're tinkering on. Um, but as I think about it, like this is bringing back that intensity and that connection of profession as play in a way that I haven't had probably for 10 years round numbers. So I love that word intensity. Thank you.
There you go. I can thank my wife for that one. But as soon as I heard it, I went, "You're right. It very much is that." All right. So closing this one out, I also, and again, this is probably playing back to learnings from the fifth discipline. I put a bit of thought in to go, what's a structure that's going to kind of anchor a conversation to go, we'll run our Dimension episodes to a general facilitation structure. And no doubt we will iterate it as we play, but it gives us a good starting point. And this is kind of lifting up kind of that world of not losing everything from a failed experiment. Because I looked at the different things we'd all written in our very different voices and styles and went, where are the patterns of things that feel passionate about talking about? And so we kind of came up with a thread to go, if you're looking for a kind of 90-minute stream, knowing that sometimes you'll get caught up and maybe it'll go a little bit longer and sometimes maybe you'll rush through and it'll be a shorter one, but kind of anchoring to 90 minutes. Sort of back to Rebecca's beautiful speech last week about not being able to be good at everything. There's a reality that not every SPC is going to try and grow in every competency simultaneously. There are going to be moments in time when leaning into competency is right for you. So when might you focus on a particular competency or dimension? If you're doing that, who are you likely to be coaching and supporting and collaborating with as you lean into it? Where might you look for growth? And back to the framework articles, starting with, hey, which framework articles should you read? And then when you want to go beyond the framework articles, where do you go for extended guidance? What books might you read? What courses might you go on? What conferences might you go to? And that's where I expect quite a bit of meaty discussion. And what are the common anti-patterns or misinterpretations of this dimension in the field? Should be an interesting discussion. And then if you're going to lean into it, what are the big things to recognize as opportunities and pain points for yourself as you enter into it? So that's our starting brief. Roll a few episodes like that, do our usual retro, reflect and learn. And away we go. And if you want a moment of jealousy, oh no, we lost the photo. But we had a photo of Ali's setup, and he has his streaming setup in hard mounts in boxes, so that he can literally just close a case and walk out the door and then reopen the case and be good to stream in place.
That's awesome. I got my driver's license in a small town in South Dakota, and the same crew served 5 different towns. They just went to a different town each day of the week, and they had the entire Bureau of Motor Vehicles field office in two or three of those hard cases. Like they could just pack it up. They literally, not just could, they did pack it up at the end of every day and set it up in a different place the next day. Um,
So
I might be able to get to that. I actually need to think about that for next summer. So thank you for the
you probably
inspiration.
do. I'd say he has a lot of lessons learned on it. He teased us for only having bought the small stream decks and said, you're going to run out of buttons. And I went, yeah, I already have. I'm thinking about the second stream deck. At the moment, I keep refactoring OBS, so I need less buttons.
Exactly. Exactly. It's a feature.
It drives refactoring and it drives cleaner, more maintainable code, right?
And I'm sure we can buy like the mount so it just holds 4 of the current size in a grid instead
Exactly.
of having to have one big one.
Wolfgang's already got 2 big ones, so he's just laughing on all the way to the bank. All right, so that was my distraction before we went anywhere near LPM Bootcamp. Anybody else want to do any distractions before we head up to what I learnt from what I eventually did with the LPM Bootcamp? Floor is open.
I'm eager to hear what you've learned.
All right.
Yeah, I've got a bunch of spinning thoughts that are only vaguely related, so let's dig in.
Let's dig in. Let me screen share and get an appropriate zoom on. So I did a sneak peek last week, the end of the show, on how I structured it. And the way I'll position all of this was I designed it to be safe agnostic, but safe inspired. And it runs to my thread of, our topics for Berlin, of this notion of maybe there's a pattern which is start at the portfolio and extend to arts. So knowing that entering it, the organization may not know safe yet, may not even have arts yet, but that if you drew your reference examples from safe, even if they were heavily contextualizing it, you had an anchor in terms of where it came from. So first module, goal was, what is LPM? So digging a little bit into portfolio definition and life cycles, then going lean portfolio management's an easy buzzword to throw around. But let's have a talk about actually what makes LPM LPM. And that one's probably pretty topical for me at the moment because I've had this little nag in some of these discussions about enterprise portfolio management versus lean portfolio management to go, surely we'd like lean enterprise portfolio management as well. But so it's a real cycle back. And then digging into the cyclical nature, which is where I'm actually going to spend a while. This was the model that eventually I figured out was pretty much the anchor of the entire course. And Eric helped me test some early thinking, invalidate some early versions. There's a kind of hidden second layer model around double loop learning that made a lot of sense, but I felt was probably just a little bit too sophisticated for where I was pitching the bootcamp. So really what I'm trying to show in this model is the idea that the truth in portfolio management is most people who start here are going to still run heavy annual cycles. And your opportunity to achieve change in your portfolio management approach really runs on a yearly cycle, right? You spend most of the year shaping next year's investment strategy. And there are some things about that investment strategy and the portfolio strategy that are only ever going to change on a fin-year boundary. Eric?
Before we get too far in, just from an engagement point of view, what are you looking for? Critique, um, underlying model critique, surface critique. What's valuable?
Let's say we go surface feedback rather than deep, because I think if we go deep, we're going to completely disappear. But if there's something where it's like, hey, we should have a follow-up chat on that as a deep, I'll drop notes for potential follow-up conversations, and that way we can travel the surface,
Okay.
drop down in other sessions.
So two quick observations to add to the surface for later then. One around the double loop learning. Maybe not too sophisticated, but just not quite the right level of application. So more abstract, up a level, out a level, rather than domain specific application. As thinking about earlier conversations. Second thing to pin, tagging on the annual opportunity comment. Your current DevOps state of evolution for your LPM is annual. So I don't know if that's a forever thing, and it might not be healthy to lock that in. But where most companies start is you get an annual shot at it.
Yeah.
Other companies actually don't get an annual shot. I know several that are on like a 3-year plan because of the way they interact with their board.
Yeah.
So just maybe putting a deployment frequency lens on it rather than just it starts annual.
It's time to start adding notes.
That is what you said you're going to do.
It is. I pondered the 3-year thing because most of my clients run an annual cycle within a 3-year. So they're actually simultaneously updating their 3-year plan while they develop their 1-year. That's pretty common over here now. I made a lot of choices about overwhelming. My experience has been it might be a 1-year plan within a 3-year plan, but there are still moments as you cross a 10-year boundary where significant change is possible, even if you're within a 3-year cycle. So that's really that first thing is you're going to run that cycle. It's going to be truth. The second is simultaneously, right? If you know that you're spending most of the year developing next year's plan, at the same time, you're trying to execute on this year's plan. And this year's plan, as a portfolio, your focus is operate and govern. And you'll have a quarterly loop, and that quarterly loop will drive a lot of your activity as a portfolio, and you'll actually simultaneously be sitting in both worlds of there are moments for next year's annual plan due this quarter, and I've got to land the quarter as well. But you get a much tighter learning loop when you come down to operate and govern than you do in terms of the shaping. And so you're kind of simultaneously in a lens. And the group that I ran this with, they were literally 2 days out from end of financial year. So it was very fresh, right? They were about to go and start to try and land the plan. And they knew they had about 2 months breather before they had to start to set up next year's plan. So rolling through, I did a bunch of activities, and maybe just before I look at the other key call outs, I did a bunch of activities to go, what does your annual cycle look like? I had a framing one that went, this is a typical, and these are kind of major milestones and quarter by quarter what's going to be happening in terms of next year. This is the documented process that you probably have. This is the reality gap from the documented process that you also have. Now go and draw your own. So I got them to draw timelines, build timelines on the walls with Post-its, and actually build timelines for both their portfolio annual and their quarterly cycles to get to these are the rhythms of the portfolio as an anchor for the current world. I also got them to put the main players, right, key accountabilities on those. So we had a view of who was in the, like, who was taking on what thing. And it was an interesting piece, and it probably speaks to Sahil's comment about collaboration earlier. A whole bunch of the people in the room had time when they were thinking about their part of the portfolio. So if you put it in, I guess, easy, safe language, as a portfolio, we had RTs and product managers in the room, and they spent part of their life looking after their piece, and they spent part of their life participating in the portfolio collaboration and building that separation of concerns to say at what moment are you wearing a portfolio hat versus at what moment are you wearing your art level hat, and recognizing that the portfolio level was where you started to be systems thinking and thinking about a broader span versus the art level where you're sort of more focusing in. It was a really interesting leveling conversation. But got them to build out their threads. And then I basically went, let's talk about lean in terms of key ideas. So I went off to Muda, Mura, and Muri, and I was almost saying them smoothly by the end of the bootcamp. I went. Also, I looked at the 6 principles, safe lean principles or lean values, identify your product, so on and so forth. So I put these up and I went, if you think about lean as a different way of looking at your world and some glasses that you can put on to see opportunity, if these are the key drivers of lean, whether it happens to be the machine that changed the world drivers or the multiple types of waste drivers, look back at the picture you've just drawn of your annual cycle and your quarterly cycle and just go and start to mark up in it where you see potential waste or potential opportunity. So it's running that cycle of build your world, now look at it through new glasses. And in that theme of the kind of evolutionary stuff, it was very much lean was let's see our world as it is. Let's put on lean glasses and let's start thinking about things that could change. So the kind of foundational principles of Kanban, start where you are, pursue improvement, encourage acts of leadership. Again, was that thread about this is what we're going to do with this. We're not going to try and change your whole world. We're going to say, let's look at it through new perspectives, identify opportunity. I also had to play with a new accountability model that I have been experimenting with lately and really enjoying. So agile hippie Mark from many years ago thought racy was a swear word, or rasky as some people pronounce it, because agile was all meant to be about shared accountability. And then Battle Scarred Mark has facilitated more role accountability workshops in agile settings than he could poke a stick at. And everybody eventually gets to the we need clear accountabilities and let's draw the races. And I saw some posts a few months ago to talk about alternatives to racy that had come out in recent years that were trying to be useful in different types of environment. I scanned a whole bunch of them. There were like 4 or 5 I went and did reading on. And the one that I settled on liking was Daisy. And have either of you guys played with it at all?
Say that again.
Daisy. Driver, approver, contributor, informed.
No, I'm seeing that for the first time, but it looks interesting.
So I'll tell you the pieces and then I'll tell you why I like it. The pieces: driver, the person steering the car. Car might be a project or an idea. And they're the person who's driving the thinking forward. Easy parallel to driver and safe would be an epic owner. Right? Safe very much configures an epic owner as the driver of the epic. They shepherd the epic through its life cycle. Approver, typical approver. Contributor was the one that I loved because it reframes the C. If you think in racy, the C is consulted, and many people translates that as their opinion's important, but there's no skin in the game. Where contributor is actually we expect you to contribute to the progress of the decision. So it's a reframing of the expectation of a lot of people who would often turn up as consultant to say, actually, you're part of the puzzle. And the job of the driver is to collaborate with the contributors to get forward movement happening. So I've experimented with it in a few workshops lately as just a different way of framing a problem. I found it's really useful because people enjoy having clarity on accountability, but it makes nice nudges in terms of their mindset about a different approach to accountability. So I threw it in, and every time we did a who's who in the zoo, looking at a life cycle, it was actually show me the daisies. And it really resonated because they all pretty much had racies for a lot of this stuff, but they enjoyed the different way of thinking about it. And it actually wound up being a place that got heavily marked up when it came time to find waste.
I really love the idea. I would probably change the I from informed to interested, because informed is something like you push information to someone, but if it's interested, then someone is like is pulling information.
It's so I in lieu of just inventing my own, I literally went when I saw the first article and it wasn't about Daisy, it was about an alternative to Racy, and I went, oh, that's got some weight behind it. So I went Googling and researching and going, what are the modern alternatives to Racy? And I read a whole bunch of articles and I went, I'm just going to pick one that I like to play with. And I played with it and I liked it. So I didn't try and reinvent it, because the nice thing about picking a model that's out there and recognized is you can go, this is not a Mark Richards special. You can go and Google and you can find answers on the way people are using it. So it was fun, right? And that's kind of the call outs
Does
from
that
the intro. So far away, Eric.
does that Daisy, does that did you apply that fractally, like teams and then people, or not relevant in this conversation? Like, could you like say a value stream is the contributor?
I put role or structure. Right. My framing to them was call out a role or call out a structure like a team or a function as
So
seems
structure,
appropriate.
okay.
Right. So I was really careful all the way through the boot camp to go, I'm not going to talk about squads or teams or trains, and anchor the conversation in a language you might not be using. I'm going to run with generic concepts and let you tell me the words you use, so that we can actually build a picture using your language rather than building a picture using somebody else's language. And that was a recurring thing for me all the way through. So there was a piece of the puzzle for me that went, it's kind of I like this as an intro. My concept as the intro was paint your world and then look at it through beginner lean eyes. And then that kind of sets a context for everything else as you deep dive. And it gives you something you can refer back to. What I didn't realize when I did that was to go, this teaches me their world and their language. So as I go deeper in the course, I've got an instant picture of their world, what they call stuff, what language they use, and what are the key things that drive their rhythms. And I can then start to teach more deeply in their own language rather than a language they don't speak. Which,
I like the implications for a initial engagement short form workshop that lets you learn that on the fly in a clean way. That's useful if it's also useful for them, which it sounds like it was.
yeah, no, there was great energy. There were a couple of insights for me in terms of my timing estimates for the module, but there was really good energy for it. So I think by the end of this, they went, Mark isn't asking us to reinvent our words yet. And there was a bit of a relief for them to talk about stuff in their own language, talking about their own world rather than a made up world. But also that at this point, I offered no commentary other than to go, here's some tools I want you to think about when you look at your own world. So there's no, this is wrong or this is broken or you got to fix this. It was, this is where you are. These are some things that might help you to think about things you might do to change where you are, and get some
That's a
startup
great
traction.
that's a great thing to just remember in how we present a lot of our conversations too.
Yeah. So moving on, second module was shaping portfolio strategy. And I just kept running this model of the shape the year, shape next year, operate and govern this year. And so I would just put little signposts to go, this module or this activity or whatever the case might be, we're about shaping next year versus we're about operating and govern this year versus this might be relevant to both, just to bake it in. I don't know whether it was worth the time and thought I put into it in terms of anybody commenting on it. but I liked it. So learning journey, learning objectives there was really talking about allocation-based investment tools, investment guardrails, and key collaborations in shaping strategy. Is that a coffee refill time, Eric? I suspect it
Seems
is.
to.
Do you want to stay on any other thoughts on module one while Eric's away, Wolfgang?
So, so portfolio is not my home ground, but I like the way that you're moving through the different topics. I was wondering the slide about Muda, Mura, and Muri.
Yep.
Did you do any activities there, or did you just explain what that is all about?
No, so the balance of the course was intensely activities. Right. So the course was the course delivered bit of it was 2 days. I think it was 90 slides in total, including 21 slides of module header, learning objectives, lesson summary. So there's about 70 real slides. And there was probably one activity slide for every 2 theory slides. And the activities tended to be 30-minute activities. Right. So it's very much framed at, let me give you a little bit of theory, let me give you time to do something with it. And then let's generate the learning through the debrief. So I was flavoring, go figure, experiential. So if you think about Muda, the Muda, Muri, Muri, I had this slide, I had the 7 types of Muda, and I covered that. I also covered the Womack and Jones model. And then I literally just said, go back with Post-its everywhere you see some waste or opportunity in your current system using those concepts, drop a post on it to flag it. And so it was a brief introduction and then go figure. And what happened was then they all had a really interesting discussion as they went, oh, what type of waste is this? And really dug in deep in terms of the application. And then we debriefed, right? What are the patterns they see? Were surprising insights. So a typical exercise was maybe half an hour job, sometimes a little bit shorter, but quite often half an hour, and then a 15, 20-minute debrief. Because I was looking to draw out most of the learning from the exercise and the debrief as opposed to from the slide.
So what you're explaining is pretty similar to what I'm doing in the value stream workshops. Actually, I do chunks of 45 minutes usually, and I'm asking them about like mapping the waste that they perceive, and then from that we look at where does the waste come from and what harmful impact does that have on other steps that are coming after the waste happened. And so I've never seen that as a part of the portfolio, to be honest. For me, this was always a part of value stream mapping. And usually I'm doing the value stream workshop for 2 days. And this is the biggest part of it because from the fragments, like here's waste, here are the steps that lead to the waste, here are the steps after the waste, then we have the fragmented value stream landscape, like with only snippets of the value stream landscape, and then we put that together. So this is funny because I didn't expect that you're doing pretty much the same thing on LPM level.
So
Thank you.
if you think about it, and this is one of the things as I thought about structuring this, and it was a really interesting thought process, right? Because I set out to ask myself, what makes lean portfolio lean, right? And I went and I did a whole bunch of Googling, and I'll tell you now, I didn't find anybody who had better definitions than Safe did. But that explicit what makes it lean is a really interesting question. And where it became particularly interesting for me was probably a self-reflection on the way in which I've entangled lean and systems thinking over the years. Because if you think about global versus local optimization, right? Global optimization is arguably more heavily a systems thinking thing than a lean thing. I saw some interesting quotes and I forget where I snipped them. They're somewhere in my highlights where people basically went the relationship between lean and systems thinking, you can't separate the two because you can't achieve the outcomes of lean without systems thinking and you can't do anything practical with systems thinking without lean.
Yeah, I'd never really thought of them as separate things,
No,
but you're right.
I had really internally they'd become bundled into it's all lean. And it's probably the going back to fifth discipline. um, and we've talked in the fifth discipline book club about the way that they're all corresponding with each other. But there's a truth that actually says a lot of the stuff that we think about in terms of global optimization is driven by systems thinking. And so I naturally went from a portfolio management perspective, then you've got waste and flow, right? Remove waste, optimize flow. So if you play with waste in terms of the three flavors on the slide, and then you play with flow in terms of the Womack and Jones circle that SAFe has shifted to in SAFe 6, there's your waste and flow. The thing I toyed with before the course, and I've decided next iteration I'm going to do, is I'm going to flavor in Ward's product development waste categories as well. Because I think Ward's product development categories of waste probably have some more nuanced triggering than the 7 types of mood. I saw an expression on your face there, Eric.
Mostly just trying to remember which wards are.
So knowledge transfer and scatter are the two that always come straight off the top of my head.
Okay.
And I think they're both, I think about them really intensely when I'm down at development value stream level. But I actually think when you're trying to get good lean portfolio management, that knowledge transfer and scatter are also both very relevant, right? Because there's some really interesting U-curve trade-offs about knowledge transfer, and portfolio functions are very easily going to be on the wrong side of the U-curve for that. And scatter, it's been a while since I read the hard definition, but scatter fundamentally is chaos inflicted by knee-jerk reactions. Right. If you go straight to Sengi, we'd be talking about reactive or proactive behavior, misintended proactive behavior, taking charge and reacting to events. And Ward has some really eloquent words on the topic. I played really hard with sticking it in, and I went, am I just getting a bit too carried away? And then I watched the insights they drew, and I went, it would have been nice. But if you take an example, one of the examples that really actually stood out to me was one of the things they all realized, and they flagged a lot of waste in their annual cycle, because they said our annual plan, and let's say a popular term for it over here is the investment slate. And they said, actually, the way we build it is iterative. You put a version together, you get some feedback, and there's some horse trading. And then you put another version together, and you get some feedback, and there's some horse trading. And then you put another version of it together, and then there's some feedback and the Hunger Games. And the process of forming your annual plan is actually an iterative process. And there's a lot of waste induced. And it was a really interesting thought process bubbled back to me in terms of what I'd seen with other clients of information that's asked for in early iterations that is going to be heavily impacted by iteration, and is a lot of work to put together. And what might happen if you just thought about going, if it's an iterative process shaping next year's slate, what happens if we think about the waste of rework, and start to balance the nature of information that goes in the early iterations given the likelihood of heavy iteration and the things that are likely to move and not move. So there's some interesting brainwave conversations out of it.
Just to play that one out, is that down that path, is that where you start to have a much higher kill rate early in the Kanban, and you're doing very lightweight analysis early, and you're starting to trigger some of those realizations?
Yep.
Cool.
So if I used, and let's use waterfall language for a minute, right? Because one of the places I saw this pretty hard was waterfall investment framing. And the first version of the slate, which was due just after the end of Q1, needed to have full resource plans for every proposed initiative. The kill rate on those initiatives and the reshaping on those initiatives that happened over the following iterations meant that that resource plan that was required for the first iteration was in 99.9% of cases going to be complete waste. Didn't kill the value of having the first iteration, but asking yourself what detail is important to drive what kind of conversations at that stage of your iteration life cycle is a different thing. So it's a nice example of, just looking at waste as it turns up. Now, I was about to move on until I saw you needed a coffee re-break. What I did in terms of dropping onto the Miro was I'll drop stuff on that lets me talk about the thread or maybe some interesting stuff that's new to this group. So I didn't drop any sub-slides on for the shaping strategy because it was literally just using tools like horizon-based thinking, zone to win, investment guardrails, running it against the stock portfolio trading analogy, and then thinking about the key collaborations that are involved in strategy shaping. So no deep dive there. It was literally just what's a different way of framing. And it was, I think we had some really good discussions about using it for resolving executive politics. And using it in terms of strategic alignment. So I cheated in setting up for the strategy framing because, again, I went, Stake would call these things strategic themes. You might call them something else, but you're going to have something that smells like a strategic theme or a pillar. And I downloaded their most recent publication to investors. And I saw the brief that they gave at their investor briefing about what their division was telling the market. And I pulled that up to go, let's talk about some example strategic themes. These are the four
How many of
things.
them had noticed? How many of them had seen that before?
I'm going to protect the innocent. I
Okay.
would say a similar percentage to what I would find in any enterprise client.
So a significant portion of the people sitting at the portfolio table had not reviewed the publicly available information that was available to the market, and you experienced massive disconnects internally, and possibly people like, how did you know that's part of our strategy? Type responses.
There was a moment where I had to explain I'd downloaded it from a website that was publicly available.
Yes. Okay.
Right. But it was a great way of framing all of the strategy discussion because, again, in terms of the mechanics of the thing, I said, look, you've got level 1 allocation tools and level 2 allocation tools. Level 1, let's talk about things like strategic themes and pillars. And then level 2, let's talk about things like capacity guardrails, investment horizons, colors of money, right? The various things that might flavor your allocations within one of your major pillars or themes. But then the activities were draw your own. right? I cheated for you. I told you what you're telling your shareholders. But let's actually build up the pillars that you're working towards. And let's build a view of what kind of level 2 guardrails you have at the moment, whether they're implicit or explicit. Again, trying to build the picture of the portfolio. As what's usually quite interesting there is you see that you have a very lopsided investment strategy. You might have 4 pillars, but your allocations to them are perhaps very different to what one might have expected. Be a common example.
A very polite way of putting it.
So then lesson 3, shape your book of work. Right. So again, I'm running the analogy of the share trading. You have an investment strategy before you buy a share. Something in your book of work, whether you call it an epic, a feature, a capability, an initiative, a project, or some other made up name, is an entry in your book of work, which is much like if you're an investor, you'd have a hypothesis about which part of your investment strategy a share was a contender for. That would cause you to option into the share. Something in your book of work is running in the same place. So it was around what are your layers? And, I start with this would be Safe's layers. But let's talk about what yours are. Let's talk about the life cycles and layers and artifacts that go with the key things in your strategic book of work. The key accountabilities of the people who move the entries in the book of work through life cycle. And then what's the picture of your book of work through all of the tools we've built so far. So one of the big things that I lean into is making sure that your enterprise PPM tool and your agile tool of choice actually connect. Because I have seen very commonly that there's one story told in PPM and a different story told in Jira. And one of the first things we usually do when we start to try and figure out what's going on in a portfolio is we try and connect Jira to PPM in terms of not integration connections, but being able to connect the work. And there's 9 times out of 10, there's zero correlation, right? It's many to manys, it's one to nones, it's goodness knows what. So you've fundamentally got in PPM the way your money's being classified and managed and progress assessed. And in Jira, you've got the agile bits that have nothing to do with the true business of strategy at PPM, right? And I'm just paraphrasing various commentaries. So again, in the spirit of starting with where you are, you go, well, you are where you are. You've got needs for different tools and different conversations, but you should be able to run a line of sight and at least have clarity so you don't have waste about what goes in which tool and the way in which those two tools are connected. And you can see here, of course, the safe book of work as an example. Then straight into an activity to go, let's build your book of work. Let's talk about the layers in PPM. Let's talk about the layers in Jira or whatever tool it happens to be. And then let's try and work out where the cutover points are and how strong the relationships are. And again, it's a cheat for me because I get to start talking about their language instead of safe language. We've got posters on the wall, and it was interesting how many photos got taken of that particular poster on the wall. Because I had people in the room who'd never seen PPM and people in the room who'd never logged into Jira. Go figure. Common scenario. And if the way you're talking about your investment and the way you're doing the work that's meant to fulfill the outcomes can't be connected, you're getting into trouble. So that was kind of the seed for that. Again, I talked about different ways you might decompose work. And knowing that there's going to be some mix of agile and waterfall and chaos in most existing books of work when you're here, I went, without being judgmental, these are common ways you might break down a book of work and common slicing tools that you'd apply as you went down the layers. Some of them are preferred in Agile, some of them are definitely not preferred in Agile, but let's just do a reality check, because you need some level of coherence and understanding about the way you actually manage your book of work. So mapped it back to these are the tools that would happen in Scrum, or Safe, sorry, in the various combinations, and then built out on their book of work to go in the work you've got, your PPM and Jira map, what are the slicing techniques you're applying at each level? Is that a thought, Eric?
Just observing the absence of by system or by architecture in here. And I'm curious if you intentionally excluded that or if you just kind of lumped that under structure or.
I probably lumped it under structure, but that's a good call out. Thank you. I think inbuilt my wiring is, because so many structures get tied back to architecture, that structure is kind of wired there, but it's a useful call out. All right, so there's the kind of safe version of the decomposition strategy. The other thing that I talk about, and again, I'm looking for terms that we can just kind of sit in their own language. So there's a term that I love to sit in, which is the idea of the lowest level of value realization. Right. And depending on your world, depending on your structure, depending on your topologies, it might be really different things. But knowing the lowest level of item in your book of work that is actually meant to be valuable is really useful. For example, if I'm not running with vertically sliced stories, there's no point pointing flow analysis tools at badly written stories, which are fundamentally tasks. Certainly not lead time on a task, go figure. So if we're really starting to go, let's analyze flow and let's analyze things like lead time, cycle time, process time, etc., and process efficiency, what I want to do is to figure out the value levels so that we can orient our flow studies towards the value levels. Arguably in Safe, feature is your lowest level of value realization. It's nice when stories are valuable and you realize value story by story. That's a high level of maturity for most Safe. It's a never reached level of maturity for some Safe. Features meant to be, again, not in all cases in Safe. In a lot of solution trains, capability kind of turns up like that. And again, by this stage in the course, you're talking whatever their own language is, and you're going, let's just help us understand the lowest level of value, because then we can just use this generic reference to the lowest level of value when we talk about other concepts later in the course. So you'll notice a lot of tap dancing here in the way I structured this to go, I'm not going to inflict a new language on you. I'm going to take ideas, map those ideas to your own language, and help you to codify what you have, and identify them using concepts that are useful to us from an LPM perspective.
It's interesting. You say tap dancing to do so, but I'm hearing a wonderfully empathetic approach towards non-judgmental self-reflection here. And it takes work, and you can call it tap dancing or just real work to hold that container. But what I'm hearing is a lovingly structured workshop that helps people come to these realizations. And at each phase, I'm like, oh, if I was sitting in that room, here's what I would suddenly be looking at. And in this one, it'd be like, oh, I should probably try to make that lower. If we can't realize value below the epic, we should probably be trying to do that smaller. I can see where I can get some benefit out of that. Instead of being like, this dude's telling us that we need to change how we work. Like our features suck. Okay, check out.
And that's the design. I'm not surprised you see it instantly and intuitively, but that's exactly what the design is. if the lowest level of value is very high, part of lean portfolio management might be how do we drive it lower, because that's going to increase the flow of value. So that was the book of work stuff. By the end of that, and I'll just show you a photo, kind of zoom into the point. I carefully checked it to make sure there was nothing visible and incriminating on it. But this is the kind of visualization they're building. So I didn't make fancy cards this way. I just went, this is iteration 1. I'm just going to print stuff on different colored papers. So we had a color scheme where green was a strategic theme. If I just use safe language, green was strategic theme, yellow was epic, white was feature. And this is their build of their book of work. The A4 pages that you can see scattered around strategic themes. So this is a stage in the processing where they've actually built a picture of their current book of work based on organized into their strategic themes with some key information called out on each item. So getting us to a kind of summary visualization in a structural sense. So you can look around you and go, well, this is our portfolio. You can see some of the posters hidden out of the way from previous activities there. I won't zoom because I've fuzzed anything I got worried about, so you won't see anything interesting if I zoom. But again, it's the kind of design we ran to, was build it, look at it differently, build it, look at it differently, build tools for looking at it differently. Back to learning to see, right? So if that's book of work, then operating and governing the portfolio. So again, I didn't call out any specific slides here. You can probably get the drift of what happened. Role of the portfolio team, your nature as a collaborator, bring it together. Seeking a balance between fixed and flexible in your portfolio roadmaps. You need roadmaps. You're going to have to go on a journey about fixed and flexible. Let's talk about some tools for that. And then I dug into the key elements of the quarterly operational and governance rhythm. So they built a sketch of that in the first module. Then we went back and we really looked at it hard and we said, you know, what are the key things it needs to achieve? What are the key moments of collaboration? And we built out this metaphor on the fly that's going back into the slides, where we talked about 3 levels on the rhythm. And this is something that I've spoken about and drawn whiteboard diagrams of 1,000,000 times and forgot when I was building the slides. But that notion in a portfolio to go, if I'm thinking about rhythm, I can also apply flow to events. And what's going to happen is I'm going to have 3 layers. I'm going to have enterprise, and let's be simplistic and say 3 layers. There's a layer above the portfolio, which will be driven by some group or enterprise function, where they have key dates, timelines, events, and expectations. The layer at which the portfolio runs events that keep the portfolio going. And then the layer of the engines beneath the portfolio in terms of their cycles, whether it happens to be PI planning or wish shift sessions or whatever the case might be. And when you think about your quarterly rhythm, what should happen is you get a nice flow of timely information and decision making connecting across those 3 layers. And that you're actually lining up the rhythms so that you can take the information that emerges from one level, incorporate it as an input to the information needed at the next level to do its next level processing, which can then produce the information that's needed at the ultimate level, and then so on and so forth back down. Because through a waste lens, there's often a heap of waste in the duplication between these 3 layers. And if you can start to be a lot more deliberate in terms of your cycle design, and knowing that generally you can't shift the things above your portfolio, you can shift your portfolio and you can help your engines below the portfolio to make little nudges. You can pull a lot of waste out of the system. and improve a lot in terms of the clarity of information that's flowing. So thinking about that, stealing some ideas from Wolfgang with his event design stuff was the topic there. Learning for me on that, timing wise, it started out as a 4-day boot camp to condense to a 2-day course with follow-ups. And what I thought I'd done was be hard enough on myself with slide and activity count to squeeze the 2 days down for follow-ups. What I found was that I evicted things to follow-ups. So a lot of what went into this module actually got evicted into the follow-up sessions, because what we actually did with the boot camp was we said it's 2 days to get us moving. We come out of the 2 days with an action plan, and then we've got 2 days spread over the next quarter to do deep dives on the things that come out of your action plan, as opposed to the 4 days in the room at the beginning. I still think the 4 days in the room at the beginning would be super powerful. And I think I'll probably offer it the 2 different ways to clients, depending on the client. So
I think about the value of the reflection time after the first couple of days, though. I mean, you've introduced a whole lot of ideas and opportunities to see and percolate. They might need some time to see.
it,
That's one of the things I really
it's
liked when you first told me about spreading this out.
it's a trade-off, Eric, and I'm seeing the trade-off play out. When you leave the room, the organizational reality crams back into you. And there's a trade-off between having excitement, right? And you can have excitement and some clear belief in some things you should lean into at the end of the 2 days. You can have made that excitement a lot more tangible and actionable with the extra time in the room in the first place before reality comes back. Right? Now,
Is it
what do I know? I know their heads were exploding at the end of 2 days, despite the fact that there'd probably only been 40, 45 slides of content. Their brains have been just like crank, 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 crank. Like everything, it's a learning iteration. I have a 1-day follow-up with them in a couple of weeks. They've done a lot of work on what we're going to use the 1 day for. It'll be my good chance to test and learn, and maybe think about what I change in the 2 days to offset some of the trade-offs in the follow-up approach. So, you know,
is it you said 2 to 3 weeks before the second visit?
I left it up to them. What I did with the follow-up was I said, let's plan for periodic check-ins and 2 half-day workshops. Right. So we had a notional intent. I said, look, this is notional. We can be flexible, but notionally, let's go with 8 1-hour check-ins and 2 half-day workshops. And as you lean into your action plan from the course, we can figure out what the right topics are for the half-day workshops versus the things we can do with the weekly check-ins. The learning has been they're more interested in bundling things to the workshops than doing the weekly check-ins. And I suspect part of that has been just the fact that they've just started a new fin year, which is crazy life for a portfolio. But I'm taking notes, studying and learning. One of the things that I'm debating about is the fact that if I propose a structure to a follow-up, it's going to drive a rhythm that's probably sensible, as opposed to leaving it more flexible where we might miss opportunities. And I'm kind of just being very mindful of that learning as I head down this one.
Yeah, and that's where I was wondering if I definitely appreciate the things go stale and normal life creeps in. And I was wondering, like, okay, so 2-day workshop and then 5 business days later, first follow-up workshop. Like, just enough percolate time, but not too much is kind of where I was trying to get to. But then executive calendars become a real thing and so on.
All right. Closing out. Last module, pursuing perfection. So by this stage, we've built their world. We know their annual cycle, we know their quarterly cycle, we know their book of work, we know their connected Kanban systems. We have a high-level DAISY accountability model over their Kanban systems. I've always felt calling out kind of key responsibility areas and who's got the ball on strategic Kanbans is really useful. Way back when we built the first one in Telstra, we had who's driving and who's supporting this stage of the Kanban. So that's all built. You come back and you go, right, we had a quick look for potential waste and flow opportunities on day one. We've now thought a lot more deeply. We've dug a lot harder. Let's go back and look at things like flow accelerators and waste. And I bought a whole bunch of little colored flags. And we came up with a flagging system where I had 4 colors for 4 types of opportunity or insight. And I just basically sent them around their walls and went, go and flag stuff where you see an opportunity or an insight about applying lean to something. And so we had their world, and I wish I had spent the time fuzzing to be able to share some of the flagged up photos because they were incredibly powerful. But fundamentally, it was that activity followed by 45 minutes action planning, right? We've learned a whole bunch of stuff. You can't act on all of it at once. You've got to start where you are. You've got all these flags of possibility on the walls. What's your backlog of stuff you're going to do over the next quarter to lean in to start driving your lean evolution? And that's the course.
That makes me think. So there were a lot of things that came to my mind while you were speaking. One of it was like there are a lot of similar things that you're doing on the portfolio level that I usually do on the solution train level in large solutions. Of course, there are a lot of things that you mentioned that I'm not doing. Like usually you have a budget for the solution train or certain guardrails coming from the portfolio, so I'm not questioning that. These are just a given. But when you think about like which item types you have and things like that, and how do you like what does a capability actually mean for you and things like that. So this is also something that I'm doing, and then I had this idea like last week we spoke about whether you think about making that a simulation like Safe City. You said yeah maybe so and I think this will be a pretty good simulation because there is it has such a depth and such a richness of things. And probably if you have a simulation, people will start to think in all different directions, like when they're confronted with Jeffrey Moore's stuff and also a lot of the safe stuff and things. And then I put these thoughts together and I thought, okay, could I do a simulation for a solution train, like with the pieces of the puzzle that I'm doing on solution train level? I don't know. I don't have an answer yet, but it's an intriguing idea. So, and actually, like my takeaway from that right now is I I didn't like I didn't like the work on portfolio level that much because it was so detached from the real work that is done by the team. So my one of the driving factors for me going to solution trains was I didn't want to get detached from the teams. I wanted to have like the person, the team, the solution area, the train inside, and not being on a level where you are deciding on much broader scope, but you are not really caring anymore for the individual person. And of course, I know that there's a necessity in larger companies with thousands of people to do that and to think strategically, and you can't care for the people there. But this is like one of the drivers. I still wanted to be connected to the value that is delivered by a single person. And LPM actually is the only class, the only safe class that I visited twice. So I participated in 2 different master classes because I really wanted to get the idea from different people telling me about LPM. And for me, it was too remote. It was too far away from what I wanted to do. It's like if I cannot get my hands dirty, I don't like it. And now what you showed is bringing it together for me. So this was the first time that I had an abstraction level of portfolio where I have the feeling, okay, this is not too far away. And also when I worked with other people on portfolio level, it always felt too far away for me. And this is probably one of the main reasons why I focused on solution trains, because I don't want to be that far away. I don't want to talk about airy-fairy things on a high strategic level and let's do something about it. And I wanted to know what impact that really has on like the minute and the hour of the working people. And so this is, I think, a pretty good blend, at least the best blend I have seen up to now. And so
Thank you,
making
sir.
that a simulation would be great. Thank you. This is one of these moments where I really like where my world is upside down. It's like, okay, maybe I have to think completely differently about what I'm doing. Maybe there is a way to connect to LPM for me.
No, it's interesting hearing that, Wolfgang, because like I struggle with that one as well, but from the point of view of how do I keep it from being that disconnected, and recognizing that there's individuals that need to live in that strategic agenda, and that there's a risk of them spending too much time, say, down in the trains being too connected. I would call it micromanagement, call it playing below your level, whatever makes sense. But trying to maintain that connection that you're talking about in a healthy way. And that's a tension that I've struggled with a lot.
But I mean, maybe it's just me, and maybe I was looking at the work of other people through the wrong lens, or maybe I misinterpreted that. But like I try to teach with a lot of people, to work with a lot of people, because like this is how I work. It's not like when I go to a class, which I occasionally do, and then I learn a lot of theory. Okay, this is fine, and it makes me think, but um, how I really learn is usually I try to work with people on stuff. And of course, I worked with people on LPM stuff. And yes, there is a lot of material out there from SAFe and also from other sources. But nothing ever really satisfied me when it comes to that. Like, maybe it was just me misinterpreting what the other people did and misreading that. But like I would say most of the people out there, at least from the like what I have seen, um, they are toying in a realm with not so much connection to the single individual worker and what impact that might have. So they are toying in a world with a market that they have to cater to, and these are all good things. But if I, so like whatever I'm doing, I don't want to lose that connection, and actually I lost that connection so often that I that like solution trains were my way out, saying, okay, this is a level of abstraction that is rather high, but it still has this connection. So maybe I just worked with the wrong people on stuff where maybe I didn't really get what they did, and maybe it's just me and not being able to comprehend what was going on. But at least in my world, most of the people lose that connection regularly when they are going into LPM.
Look, I resisted LPM for a long time on a pretty similar basis, right? Um, teams of trains. That was me. And it's like LPM was somebody else's problem. That wasn't what I was about. And there came a moment when I just acknowledged it's only when you play at that level that you can change the shape of the system at work, right? And if you can change the shape of the system at work, you can unblock amazing numbers of things for the teams and trains that you care about. And then luckily I coached some people who taught me a lot.
I think I had a slightly different journey where I like almost rushed to that level because I saw the potential to fix the containers. That's the language I was thinking of. It was a point of leverage. It was the opportunity to create sanity for the many people working in the teams and trains. And for a long time, I found it almost demotivating, demoralizing for myself because of the slow speed of change and that annual cycle, and things just feel so hard. But when you do get a breakthrough, it is truly transformative, not just incremental.
Yeah.
And like when working in the teams and the trains, like working with the Scrum team, it was beautiful. You'd talk about stuff, and the next week you come back and they'd like wildly changed everything, and it was amazing. And like you actually saw people react to your words and do things.
Yeah.
And a train is a little slower, but it happens.
Yeah.
Like, and especially when there's like high stress, high criticality programs for the enterprise, and it's like, wow, I just helped a 500-person solution train pivot in a 2-week period. And this is delightful and amazing. And look how wonderful this is. And then like I hear back LPM, I hear back from clients like 2 years after I work with them that something happened, if I'm lucky. And it's like, oh, this,
Oh,
like
look,
you don't get that rush.
I
But
just had a check-in email with a client that I'd done a lot of portfolio work with, and it was the group CIO, and I was making an introduction between him and somebody else because I figured they'd enjoy chatting. And he comes back and he's like, "Ah, it's been too long, Mark. By the way, you'll be pleased to know we're about to make this breakthrough on capacity funding." And that was a seed we planted 2 years ago, going, that's the destination. What are the foundations we've got to lay to build the muscle and the confidence and the trust for us to head there? And it was so exciting to go, learning to do that slowness of going, oh, okay, if we leave this for now, that's a year. But to hold yourself and to live the reality. It's good fun. So Eric, you saw the very, 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 very raw version of this. Thoughts on the very, very raw version you saw versus what it shaped to a week and a half later?
oh, has it only been a week and a half? It feels longer in my brain. But
Well, it's longer since we had that chat. It was a week and a half between
mm,
this deck and that talk.
the overlaying of the facilitative elements, like the clear learning journey and the unveiling of perspectives that comes through great sequencing is night and day. Like going from theoretical model of what underpins a workshop, which was effective, sounded cool. I could see the haze of potential, but I couldn't have a vision of what you were going to produce. And what I would have produced from that point would have been wildly different, probably. To seeing where you're at now and being like, yeah, I feel like I could pick this up and run with it. That's kind of really cool. That level of transition in the short time frame is beautiful to observe. Just being able to see that gap. Honestly, a little bit of that personal satisfaction element of, oh, I had a great conversation and I could tell I provided a little bit of inspiration, and now this amazing thing has been created in the world.
But
So that
you would have been watching, going, "Yeah, that was me. That was me."
not even honestly not that much. Um, I've noticed that I'm going to go on a tangent here because it's a fun one for me. Is I notice in a lot of these coaching conversations, mentoring, review, whatever you want to call the relationship, the person receiving the insights puts a lot more credit on the person that was doing the so-called mentoring. While the mentor is like, I asked a question, I wasn't really going anywhere with that, and Mark had some great insights when he answered the question. And it's one of those things like when you have two people who are fairly self-aware, somehow still most of the knowledge ends up in the middle, not on one person or the other. Like both person are like, oh, Eric said this. No, Mark had this insight. and the reality was it wouldn't have happened either way without both of us talking.
No. The facilitative approach was that structure, the unveil and the provocation was in my head from day one, because it was literally, that's what I do with a client. And how do I turn that into a boot camp? But how to actually structure and model it, the provocations you gave me in that first chat were just so useful for helping it to gain coherence.
Oh, thank you. And you're welcome.
So that's the boot camp. Do we want to open something else or have an early Saturday?
I think we're at our 2-hour mark, aren't we?
Oh, actually, we are, aren't we? I was
mean, what
joking
should
with
come
my
after
wife
that?
earlier that it's usually I look at my watch at 2 a.m. and go, it's time to wrap. But
But really, I mean, what should come after that in that stream? It's like, this is really brilliant stuff. And it actually, when we started out with a presentation and you just led us through the slides on the mirror board, it was okay, nice. But now that we're done, it's such like it's such a complete picture, and so I don't know what to do with that, but probably like my day is still a couple of hours long. Probably I will take that with me in the day and just see how that resonates with me and what it does with me, because now I have to say I have a different picture. I had one another like epiphany moment when we were in Erlangen and did the training together, and then Sahil talked about portfolio, and I thought, wow, this is cool. So he really knows what he's talking about. But now this is the second time that I really think, okay, portfolio is obviously something completely different than what I was told, or what people did when I was around, or how I like how I try to perceive that myself, or get deeper into that. So, I mean, for me, it would be the perfect moment to end the stream, because like this is something that takes a while for me to digest.
cool. Well, I just because I'm excited to hit the button again and discover live whether it's going to hold up being hit twice in one stream. I'm going to take us out with my intro again.
What? Do we need to retro first?
Do we need to what?
Retro.
Oh, that's a very good point. Retro. Thank you for holding me up, Eric. Retro. Thoughts. This was probably I'm going to kick just to trigger thought processing. Here's my kick. We have been. I kind of like the little warm up that I've experimented with of going highlights of your week just to get the conversation flowing. And it's interesting what sparks out of that sometimes. This is the first time we've gone deliberately so deep, so long, and in such a structured fashion on one thing, as opposed to a lot of our other Saturdays where we've kind of had a general idea, but it's been much more organic. And I know for me, sometimes I like to go deep and structured, but I actually really value the more organic conversations and the more organic nature of Saturdays. So I certainly wouldn't want to go deep and structured every Saturday. And I didn't like the fact that it was so much of me talking and so little of you guys talking. So there's my retro input.
I'm jumping in. So actually, I had to look back at what we did in the beginning, because we talked about the structure of the streams and things. I didn't even remember what we started out with, because this portfolio stuff that you showed was so strong, or resonated so strongly with me, that I completely forgot about the beginning. Now in the retro, I thought about, okay, how did we actually start? So for me, it was the perfect mix. I could just listen to you. I hadn't had the feeling that you were talking too much. Quite the opposite. So it was more like, carry on talking. This is cool. And, I really enjoyed that. Even though, yes, probably I didn't have that much speaking time, but this is not what really counts for me. What counts is like, do I get things out of that that I couldn't really that I can toy around with, that I could really build something with, and this was perfect. I think we can do that more often, like having such a structured approach. I really love that, and and I have mastered push to talk, as Eric told me. I've mastered that. Yes.
Gonna enjoy that. You know what? There's something that I haven't got to do very often, and I'm just going to do it in celebration for you. If you have the stream up on another channel.
Nice. Nice. I hope you get to use that button more and more, Mark. Retro though, and then I need to hit the road for an 8 a.m. Class. I think I'm generally aligned with you, Mark. I really enjoyed going deep. I loved hearing the details, and I'd be sad if this was every Saturday. I think this is the kind of thing that we probably make into more special edition streams
That's my feeling
as we do
well,
more of
right?
it, because I'm looking at it like, and I could easily take any iteration or two out of the program and have a similar stream where we talk about the 5 concepts for an hour.
Yeah.
And that's not a great Saturday morning thing, even though it's more of a set of small topics that are related. I don't think that's what we want as much of on the Saturdays.
Yeah.
But once in a while, I think it's great. Like, this is a piece of content that I'll point people at. It's like, oh, you're thinking about how to engage people in LPM. You may not want to try to run this workshop. First, you'd have to ask Mark, and second, Mark's Mark, and this is not necessarily a workshop for beginners to run as structured. But listening to you cover that is a step on the LPM competency journey for SPCs. Back to that brief intro we had. And this kind of deeper content, I think, has a huge forward value for people. So I don't want to not do it. I just don't know if it's the Saturday streams.
That's my conclusion too. I kind of verbalized it. I thought about it. I listened to you and I went, I agree. It's a special purpose. Like back to that conversation about being purposeful about the way we're using our different stream shows. Something deep like this, easy spin-off stream. Which isn't to say that we might not wind up doing a really long conversation on a single topic on a Saturday night. But at least we'll hear all the voices and it will feel more like a coffee shop than a speech. And I had moments when I was dropping stuff in going, I hate the fact I've got my branding all over this stuff because that's not really what we're about. So I just couldn't be bothered killing the branding.
I want to disagree on that one. As long as if it's our stuff, I think that's fine. I mean, we're sharing. And by definition, we're probably sharing our stuff because we're not part of large consultancies with a huge pile of corporate branded stuff that we didn't create.
True.
So I'm gonna encourage you not to worry about that bit.
All right. Then in that case, with the timely thanks for the retro, I'm going to see what happens when I hit the intro button again. And actually, no, I'm not going to hit the intro button again because it's got start stream built into it. Maybe I can just do it natively. I wonder what happens there. No, I'm not. I'm just going to say sayonara and go, oh, I need another version of the intro button. So give me an outro button.
Yes, you need a bigger stream deck, right? Oops, no, I'm sorry. You need a different button.
No. I've got a refactor. The whip crack at the moment takes up 4 buttons on every panel because I've got one for each. Every panel on the stream deck has 4 possible scenes. It's got a all chatting just the screen, number of people chatting plus the stream. And the way I first built the Soapbox whip crack was a filter specific to the individual stream scene. What I've since figured out is that with the right approach, I can abstract that down one layer, which is what I have with, say, the names flying in on the intro screen. That's just a set of move filters on an abstract scene that then work on any scene I drop them onto based on where I size the box. So I've got a set of refactors to come. This is fun, right? I get to talk about refactoring again. So I'm gonna gain 3 buttons back for every Stream Deck scene when I do my refactoring. All right. On that note of geekery, have a wonderful what's left of your Saturday, and I'll see you on Discord.
Enjoy.
See you.